at Unity Fellowship Church, and this was some of my journaling at the time, I thought, which is very significant to evolving. It's been 10 years since I wrote in my journals. My, how the years have passed. A lot has happened over the last decade. My life has changed so much, but yet it is still the same. Well, where should I start? My last entry in my journal was in 1990. I spoke of many things going on in my life. I was 23 years old, and things were coming from me in every direction. My first entry speaks about what was going on with me during a train ride to South Carolina on November the 6th, 1989. My father, Levester Worthy, had died. 10 days later, on Wednesday, November the 16th, 1989, my great-grandmother, Miss Lula B. Johnson, died. January the 1st, 1990, my best friend, Maurice Wanamaker, was murdered. This was a very trying time for me, but I managed to triumph through it all. I came through a stronger man. By the middle of April of 1990, I got some of the best news of my life. I was going to have a son. My son, I like the way that sounds, my son. He was born December the 10th, 1990, one day after my birthday. His name is Wesley Francis Small. I was a proud man. My life was at its highest point. But I say to myself, now, boy oh boy, little did I know the journey I was about to take. My life hit full speed ahead. To make a long story short, let me run through some of the major events. As for my son, I only saw him up until he was 6 months old. I have not seen or heard from him or his mother up to this day. I did become a foster parent in 1990 and took care of two boys, 7-year-old Nathar and 16-year-old Leon. I managed to get a good job at the Daily News. I opened up a club called Club Juno. By the end of the year 1991, things had yet changed again. My grandmother, Miss Willie Bell Worthy, died on February the 12th, 1991. The end of the year was approaching. It was around September or October of 1991. The club was going well. Nathar was doing well. My son and Maria and his mother were nowhere to be found. My life at this point was under control. And then the unexpected happened. There was a fire at the club. Not a major fire, but enough to do damage. Once again, things began to change. My soul began to feel sad about what I had chosen to do and how it was all falling apart. Everyone who I thought were my friends were nowhere to be found. Nathar had now gone to another foster home. I had quit my job at the Daily News. The club needed repair, and all who were there weeks before had now moved on. I once again was on my own. I sit one night with my thoughts, thinking about many things and many people. One person came to mind that I had met that year. I remember thinking of this nice, quiet young man who I'd spent a few nights with from time to time. Whenever I got stressed and wanted to get away from it all, I would sometimes turn to him. Our relationship was platonic. We loved lying next to each other in the safety of each other's arms. When we got together on these nights, I remember thinking, I hope the morning never comes. On this night when I was sitting with my thoughts, I never made that call. I made another decision. I was going to move out of New York. I was going to Atlanta. And within 4 weeks, I had sold everything I had, and off to Atlanta I went. Atlanta was an experience in and of itself. For the most part, I did well. Everything went as planned. But I was not happy. I got a good job, met a young man who had moved to Atlanta from Kentucky. Things began to be a little better with my spirit, but my soul still yearned for more of whom I wanted to be. At the time, I paid no attention to my soul, what my soul wanted, so I kept on the path I was following, and far too soon I encountered an experience I did not expect. I got into a fight and ended up in jail. My jaw was broken, my face was cut, and my spirit hit an all-new low. My path was hitting rock bottom.
Wow.
After getting out of jail and going to the hospital, I woke up in the recovery room, not knowing what had happened. I made another decision that day. I was going to live. I was going to get better mentally, physically, and spiritually, so I called upon the ones who I knew was there with me all the time. My mother, father, everything God.
Amen.
Little did I know, he had already said, And so it is. Now with the three important people in my life, me as my observer, God is my guide, and Chuck was my caretaker, I started the new assignment to my life. After surgery, my mouth was wired together. I hadn't eaten for 8 weeks. I had lost half my body weight. I became unable to live with it. I was mad. I couldn't understand what was wrong. It got harder as each day passed. But one thing always stayed the same. I watched and observed myself. God guided me, and Chuck took care of me. Now about 12 weeks had passed. One day I was sitting home alone with my thoughts. Something came to my spirit. It said you needed to move on. This time, I decided to listen to that inner voice and ask questions. I wanted to find out what I needed to do and where was I going. One day, I was having a conversation with Chuck and I told him about my idea to move on. He responded, "Let's go to Kentucky." The days following that conversation, I continued to observe myself and listen to my inner thoughts. Many things came up. Often I got afraid. I knew in the back of my mind that I had come to Atlanta to die. What was I going to do and where was I going to go? I had never been to Kentucky. What was there for me? I told myself I couldn't go back to New York. It's the last place I needed to be. All these questions came to my thoughts, but I followed my spirit, and within a few weeks, we were in Kentucky. Again, how and where my journey was going to take me, I didn't know. During the next 5 years, a number of things happened. My relationship had its ups and downs. Chuck began to question the relationship. He could not understand the newfound power I had about myself. I was beginning to change in some ways that even I didn't understand. Looking back on the experience, I now know I was about to make another move. Chuck moved out. I came home one day. The first thing that I noticed is the sofa was gone. I fell to my knees. What was I going to do now? The world that I had built, the place that I had subconsciously built in my mind in order to die, crumbled in ruins. Oh my God, I spiraled into a deep depression. I was now ready. I had nothing, no dreams, no hope, no love, no family, no money. My thought behind the thought had now manifested itself. I lay in my bed one night and I prayed. I prayed that I would never wake up again. But instead of closing my eyes and dying, or even going to sleep, I stayed up all night. I cried. I cried a long time. I stayed up all night crying. If I remember right, I cried a long time. I stopped eating. I stopped going places. Life was over for me. I was ready to die. I knew that if God didn't call me home, I was surely going to kill myself by depriving myself of anything that had to do with life. So I waited, and nothing happened. And then I remember one night I prayed again. I said, "Lord, what's wrong? Why have you not called me home? Where are you? Why have you forsaken me?" I remember just as clear as day the thought after the question. He said, "I've been waiting for you to call. You see, I have given you free will. I cannot interfere with your choices unless you call upon me to help." Oh God, for the first time in about a year, I understood. I knew what I had to do. I felt the presence of life when I heard that inner voice. Home was not heaven. It was New York City. My journey was taking me back after all these years. I was going back to the place that I had run away from, the place that I had feared the most, New York City. I arrived at Penn Station on a Greyhound bus sometime around the summer of 1997. I had gone on a long journey, but I had made it back. Many things were going through my mind. Have I made the right decision? Where was I going to go? What was I going to do? I ended up in the village looking across the water at New Jersey. I felt bad. I looked bad. I had nothing. But I knew God had a plan. I knew I was a fighter. I began to close my eyes more often. I wanted to feel more of what I was feeling. I wanted to hear what was being said. Something was happening. Something was changing. Being back in New York was giving me life again. The one thing that I had feared would take my life was now giving me life. I ended up staying with a friend in New Jersey. I began to rest. I took a lot of time out, and I talked with God. A few months had passed. I was getting out more often. I bought myself a new wardrobe. I was trying to look good. You know how the boys are in New York. I say the girls in New York. By the end of the summer, I had really gotten myself together. I had started a new business with my friend Michael. I was going to the gym and hanging out at the beach, walking up and down Christopher Street 3 or 4 times a week. Still, things were changing for the better. I met up with an old friend, someone who I'd known from the very first time that I came to New York in the village in 1984. We became like brothers and soon became roommates. I was walking with my roommate in the village one day, and to my surprise, guess who entered my life again? If you guessed the young man whom had comforted me years later, you're right. All these years, he had never entered my thoughts. He was single. I felt his energy. He gave me his phone number. I was smiling from ear to ear. Boy, was life getting better. As my roommate and myself walked away that night, I told him something had changed in New York. Something was different. Something was different about me. I was beginning to understand what my journey had been about. He told me about his family in this place called Unity. I was intrigued and kept listening. It all came together the first day that first Sunday I walked into Unity Fellowship Church. Now let me tell you the point of this story. Let me tell you what it all means and what I understand about my life and whom I'm choosing to be. These experiences have taught me so much about myself. I understand my life and whom I'm choosing to be. I understand who God is and who I am in relationship to Him. The best thing about this relationship with God is that this is only the beginning, the Omega. The Omega is yet to come. God is love and love is for everyone. These words are so big that it's hard for the mind to conceive just how profound such a simple statement can be. This journey and every experience in my life I now know has been about getting back to remember who I am, not what I can be. I have learned that the soul only has 2 emotions, love and fear. Neil Donald Welch put it in very simple terms in his book, Conversations with God in Uncommon Dialogue, Book 1. He says, all human actions are motivated at their deepest level by one of 2 emotions, love or fear. In truth, there are only 2 emotions. In truth, there are only 2 emotions, 2 words in the language of the soul. These are the 2 opposite ends of the great planetary which God created when He produced the universe and the world as we know it today. These are the 2 points, the Alpha and the Omega, which allows the system we call relative to be. Without these 2 points and without these 2 ideas about a thing, nothing else can exist. Every human thought, every human action is based in either love or fear.
All right, now.
There's no other human motivation. All other ideas are but diversities of these 2. They're simply different versions, different twists on the very same thing.
Okay.
All my life, I have been swinging from one emotion to the other. I understand what Mr. Welch was talking about when he continued to say, and so it is in the moment that you greet your, it is in the moment that you pledge your highest love, you greet your greatest fear.
Say that now.
For the first thing you worry about after saying, I love you, is whether you hear it back. And if you hear it back, you begin to worry that the love you have just found, you will now lose.
Say that.
And so all your actions become reactions.
All right, now.
Defenses against losses, even as you seek to define yourself against the loss of God. But yet, if you know who you are, that you are the most magnificent, the most remarkable, the most splendid being
Go
God
ahead,
has
sir.
ever created,
Yes, sir.
you would never fear.
Amen.
But who can project such a wonderful magnificence?
Powerful.
For who can reject such a wonderful magnificence? Not even God can find fault in such a being.
That's right.
You see, fear wraps the body in clothing, and love allows you to stand naked.
Come on now.
Fear clings and clutches to all that we have. and love will give everything you have away.
Good.
Fear holds close and love holds dear. Fear grabs and love let go.
Yes.
Fear wrinkles and love smooth.
Yes. I like that.
Excuse me.
It's all right.
Rich.
Every human thought, word, or deed is based in one emotion or the other.
Well,
You have no choice with this because there's nothing else from which to choose. But we do have free choice on which one of these we select.
well,
You see, I'm telling this story because I don't feel the world owed me something. I'm telling this story because in my experience, God has been with me every step of the way.
yes.
I tell this story because I now understand that I did not come to this world looking for love. I am love.
All right now.
This experience has awakened me to remember how powerful and magnificent God made me. I tell the story because I am now ready. Ready to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves.
Well,
I'm ready to give and receive love. I'm ready for a relationship. No, not a relationship, a spiritual partnership.
all right.
I'm ready to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. I'm ready to clothe the naked and to feed the hungry.
Yes.
I'm ready to have a conversations with my brothers and speak of those two emotions of the soul, love and fear.
All right.
I'm going to close this testimony, and the words in the book of Conversations with God is my testimony. Here's what it says. I hold on to my values so long as they serve me, but yet I'm going to look to see whether the values I serve with my thoughts, words, and actions, are they evolving and bringing to the space of my experience the biggest and best ideas that I ever had about myself? I'm going to challenge you, men. I'm going to challenge you with Mr. Wirt's words in closing. He says to examine your values one by one and to hold them up to the light of public scrutiny. If you can tell the world who you are and what you believe without breaking stride or hesitating, you are happy with yourself. And there will be no reason much further to continue in this dialogue because you've created a self and a life of self which would need no improvement. But I challenge you. I challenge you to stand with me as my friend, stand with me as my brothers, stand with me as my lovers. Whatever you do, take a stand in love. I am created in the image and likeness of God. And I'm going to use my power to take a stand and say, and so it is. I read this excerpt from my autobiography because in some ways it reminds me of that 15-year-old whose body was found in the Hudson River. You see, I made it through my journey. I was able to find people and places that loved me. But the young man who, in the article, his last words were, "No one loved me." I was impressed last week with Sir Isaac Nelson's message, and he left us with these words: we still got work to do. We need to wake up and do the work. There's so many young men out there who are still looking for us to be the lead as the first generation of men to move through this world as free people. And I so much, if you look, I don't talk a lot about my life, but if you look at my life, I spend most of my time doing the work. I'm so proud of my sons that are here today. We have Emmanuel who's here, beautiful. We have Anthony who's in the back. And Malachi is probably somewhere sleeping. God is wondering. So this is the work that I do. This is the work that we got to do. I hope my testimony, I hope what I've shared to you has been some pleasure to you and will help us do the work. Keep me and my family in prayer. God bless you.
Amen.
Come with your speaker. Come with your speaker. Come with your